And welcome back. Joining me now, Charles Belk, a TV and film producer who was wrongfully detained by the police, Beverly Hills Police. He's now teamed up with the police in a new video. Charles, good to have you here, man.
Thank you so much, Larry. Good to be here.
You probably have a better understanding of what went down in Florida, in Ferguson, almost than anybody else. You were arrested falsely, accused of robbing a bank by the Beverly Hills Police Department. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt, my situation is far, less than what's going on down there. But whenever you are stopped and confronted, and you know you're innocent, at least in my case, it brings a series of thoughts through you that you're like, what is going on? Why am I being stopped? What's happening right
So you're minding your own business, having lunch. You go out to put some money in the meter. The cops come up, arrest you. They assume that you look like this guy they think is a suspect. By the way, the guy they thought was a suspect turned out not to even be involved in the bank robbery, which was interesting. But you did sort of resemble that suspect. You admit that? I
do admit that from the description that the police had, tall, bald, black, that was me. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And you were arrested, however, for 6 hours.
I was detained on the corner for 45 minutes in handcuffs.
Right.
Then transported to the station where I was held for 6 hours, and they cleared me at the end of that 6 hour in 5 minutes because they watched the video, which they didn't do on the front end.
Right. So this whole thing should have happened within a matter of minutes, certainly maybe an hour, no longer than that, not 6 hours.
Correct.
How do you feel about that? Do you feel that you were racially profiled? Do you feel that it would have been 1 hour had you been white as opposed to 6 hours because you're black?
Well, I can honestly say that I understand the job that law enforcement has to do. I understand that they had a crime that was committed. They identified me. I fit that initial description. I do think that, though, after 10 minutes, there was a certain level of process that could have been followed to quickly determine that I was not that person.
And they've admitted that, too.
And they have indeed admitted that, and my hat's off to them for that. So when asked whether I was racially profiled, I believed initially that there was a time period that a process was not being followed because I was assumed to be guilty. For whatever reason, as opposed to assuming me to be innocent, I was assumed to be guilty. Was that contributed to race? Perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Did they ever say anything that you thought was racist? Anything that you thought was insensitive, unfair? Did they treat you respectfully?
Of the 3 law enforcement agencies that I interacted with out down that curve, the one that initially stopped me, who had on a helmet cam, was very polite, talked to me. The third officer I interacted with, who was a lieutenant, came, sat and talked with me and listened to what I was saying for a short period of time. It was the second law enforcement agency that came out of the car. He was actually one that transported me. That's the person who I felt really thought I was just guilty, just by sight. He rushed over to me, he stood me up, he put me in handcuffs, and I just didn't feel that I had a chance of being innocent in his eyes.
Did you ever get an apology from the individual officers?
No, I did not. Mm-hmm. I did not. I got an apology from the lieutenant and the 2 FBI agents that night, and then I got a great apology from the chief of police.
Now, you're working with the police right now.
Yes.
One of the many things that happens with police and young black men is young black men feel that automatically they are perceived as being guilty. The police will always say, comply, you won't die. What's the disconnect here?
I think there's a couple of disconnects. I think that there's some education and some sensitivity that needs to be done on both parts. Law enforcement need to understand when arresting anybody
You're such a charming guy. You don't look like a bank robber to me.
That's the day. The law enforcement agencies, and thank you, by the way, law enforcement agents need to understand that it's routine for them. So they're used to arresting people, but innocent people aren't used to being arrested. So regardless of your race or your sex, there is that level of sensitivity that needs to be done. Now, when you look at African Americans, black people in general, we have a history of being wrongfully detained, being taken and transported to places that we didn't want to go.
It's an ugly legacy that we have.
Exactly. And so, unfortunately, we're sensitive to that, and we're going to be quickly to react when we're feeling that we're innocent and our freedom is being taken away again. On the individual side, I sat down, I complied, I was nice, my main goal was to get home. And I think that citizens, people who are wrongfully detained, need to understand that nothing's gonna change out there on that curve. You're gonna have to, unfortunately, go through that process, and then kind of fight back later outside of that system where you have more of a voice. And I've been encouraging folks along the way that you can make a difference. You can't make a difference when you're handcuffed on a curve,
right,
but eventually you can make a difference.
You mentioned earlier that one of the officers had a camera.
Yes.
One of the things I've noticed in Rialto is that they equipped all the officers with cameras. The officers didn't like it at first, but then what happened is the instances of force went down, the numbers of complaints went down. It turned out that cameras improved the behavior of both sides of the deal.
Well, you know, if an officer is on the right side of the law, they should love cameras, because when they get that criminal who's on the wrong side of the law, it proves that they were doing their job right. So I would think that if an officer is doing the right thing, they would love a camera. It could only help them. It's the law enforcement agencies that sometimes may not, and I hear stories all the time, that may not be doing the right thing, that probably are a little fearful of having cameras with them.
Charles, I saw a report of how many towns there are in this country, like Ferguson, that are predominantly black, but the police department is predominantly white. While we're talking about cops and calling them pigs and other things that we can't say on the air, how is it that black people are supposed to be encouraged to be cops when cops have such a negative reputation in the black community?
Well, you know, the president recently, and I was at a session, a dinner, where he said that he wanted to see race relationships between law enforcement agencies and the community greatly improve. I think that we as a people, and when I say that, I mean black people, we as a people need to, one, respect the job that law enforcement agencies have to do, but we also need to make it a point that if the law enforcement agencies aren't representing the community, you are that community. You have a say in that. You need to take some action to make sure that that agency represents the racial makeup of that community.
We're going to talk a little bit more about this. Coming up, it's our grassroots citizen panel. Stay with me. You're watching The Rick Amato Show right here on OAN.